Hi, today's video we are going to look at how to determine your factory and your installation costs on the Starfront program. So for those of you who've been following along, you'll remember we've done a contract, we did our costing, and we based our costing on our total material cost plus 100% markup. In other words, we have our total material cost, our markup is equal to the total material cost, and that will give us our total costs on this contract. How do we then determine our factory costs and our installation costs? The first thing we must remember is we cannot work on a gross profit of 100% if we are going to put in our factory and our installation costs. We've got to work on a more realistic figure of, let's say, 25% margin. So what am I going to do? This contract has already been designed, and if you remember, we have went into our costing details button, and our contribution on each of those windows is currently set to 100%. So I am going to go and I'm going to straight away reset my contribution. So I put in 25 in that box, and I say set all the contributions to 25%. Now my contributions are set at 25%. It's not going to update on the screen until I push recalculate, because it has to go and work out all the figures for us first. But now that we've got a realistic contribution, now we need to put in an accurate figure for our factory costs and for our installation costs. Let's first have a look at our factory costs. You'll see here that the program has determined 38.4 man hours. That's the amount of labor that is required to manufacture these windows and doors that form part of this contract. Where does it get that from? Well, if you remember from one of the previous videos, if you go to your configure menu, you go to your user configuration, you will know that we can set times for each of the basic manufacturing processes required to make our aluminium windows. Now, initially these times are preset for you at a realistic value. You can go and modify these times, but for the time being, we're just going to assume that these labor times are representative of our business. The easiest way for you to determine that is to do a simple small contract, and on that small contract you do a single window, estimate how long it would take your factory to make that window, and then make sure that the amount of time that Starfront allows is realistic against that one single window. If it's realistic for one window, then it should be realistic for all of your designs. So we have allowed 38.4 man hours. What is a man hour? That means if one person worked on this job, it would take them 38.4 hours. If two people worked on that job, it would take them half that time. 4 people, a quarter of that time, etc. So it's the total amount of time multiplied by the number of people that are working on that job at one time. So these are the critical figures. We have to determine what is our factory labor. In other words, for that 38.4 man hours, how much are we paying in terms of wages for that factory staff? That is the one figure we have to build in, and that will be put in on this side here. And then we also have to represent what our overheads are for that particular job. Now, our factory overheads are going to be expressed as a percentage of our factory labor. And what we have is there's an Excel spreadsheet that is supplied together with Starfront that you can use to help you determine your correct factory labor and your correct factory overheads. Similarly, when it comes to our installation time is not calculated for us. We need to specify that. You might remember during the design phase, we left all our installation times at 0. We need to now go back and we need to allocate installation time. And I can allocate that just by going into, for example, my costing details page And here, where our installation was all 0, I can go in and I can say, okay, door number 3, which was our Vistafold door, let's allow 4 hours to install that. Our shop front, let's allow 5 hours. Window 1 and window 2, we allow them 1 hour each. Window 3 will allow 1.5 hours. Window 4, 1.5 hours. And window 5 will allow 2 hours. So we could have either done that during the design phase as we went along, or we can go afterwards and we can allocate the installation time. So let's set that, and once again we have to push our recalculate before all of this is going to be updated. On the installation, we need to work out what is our installation labor and what are our installation overheads. And once again, those 4 figures in blue are going to come out of the Excel spreadsheet that is supplied together with the Storefront program. So where do we find that Excel spreadsheet? Well, it's very easy. You go to your Tools menu. Under the Tools menu, you've got an icon which says Spreadsheets. Click on that icon. And you'll see it will list a couple of spreadsheets that are supplied together with the Storefront program. The one that you are going to use is a spreadsheet called Fabricator. To save us a bit of time, we've set up an example. It's called Fabricator Example. And we will work through the Fabricator example, but you will take the Fabricator spreadsheet and you will fill in your company's information onto that spreadsheet. So let's go and have a look at that Fabricator example. I can select it and say Open. Obviously, you require Microsoft Excel on your computer to do that. And it opens up and it looks as follows. Now, first of all, the convention on these spreadsheets is you only change the figures shown in red. The figures which are shown in black have been locked and have been calculated for you. You will only fill in the figures that are shown in red. If you look at the bottom of the page, you have a tab for the factory labor. Then there's a tab for the factory overheads. Zoom in a little bit on that one. Then there's a tab for my installation labor. And there's a tab for my installation overheads. Your Fabricator cost breakdown is then the last tab where you are going to get your 4 blue figures out, which are going to be put back into the Storefront program. So let's start off looking at what our factory labor spreadsheet requires. Okay, the starting point is I have to specify how many workers do I have involved in the manufacturing of those windows. Now guys, this excludes drivers, it excludes people cleaning the factory, it excludes people making tea and coffee. This is strictly the people who are making the aluminium windows and doors. So I've put on my spreadsheet that I've got 8 workers, and then I put in how many hours a week do those workers work. And I've got 40 hours for those workers. Then what I do is I put the names of those 8 workers down on the left hand side. Alright, then for each worker I can put in what is their hourly rate that they're getting paid. Now guys, these figures which are supplied on the spreadsheet are really fictitious. They are very outdated. You can't just assume these values. You need to go and put in your true values of what is the hourly rate that you are paying each of those workers. That will then work out what their weekly wages are. Then you have an allowance for an annual bonus. Most people take 3 or 4 times their weekly pay, so you can put that figure in there. And this is an Excel spreadsheet, so if you want to say that this is equal to 4 times that column, you can do that. And then you can copy that formula down to these guys here. So you can manipulate this spreadsheet in whatever way you want. So I have what their hourly rate is, that says what their weekly wages are. I then have my allowance for my annual bonus, which is their 4 weeks leave pay. Then I have any medical contributions that I make towards those people. I then have my pension and provident contributions. UIF is automatically calculated for you. And then there's an additional 3 columns where you can put whatever information you want in on those. And if you want to add extra columns, you can insert columns into this spreadsheet. So it should be relatively easy to fill in this first page. The names of the workers, their hourly rates, what their bonus is, medical, pension provident, UIF, and any other expenses or payments that I make to those staff. What this will then show me is that on a weekly basis, I'm paying 8,410 Rand out as wages for those manufacturing staff. But in fact, what those manufacturing staff are costing me is actually 11,509 Rand. Okay, because of the fact that we have these additional costs involved. So that's step one, and I think it's fairly simple. We should all be able to fill in that information. Then we go to the second tab, which is our factory overheads. And our factory overheads are all the other expenses, excluding the factory labor that we've accounted for now, that is required to keep our factory running. So we're going to have things like rent, water and lights, municipal taxes, levies, our payments on our vehicles. Now you must be careful when you're dealing with vehicles, because we are talking about the vehicles that are not used for installation. Any vehicles that are used for installation are going to form part of the installation overheads. Alright, then we've got the servicing on those vehicles, petrol and oil on the vehicles, telephone accounts, cell phone accounts, any other wages. So that any other wages, if I've got other staff that get paid on a weekly basis, in other words they earn wages, then they will fall in under this section. They're not involved in the manufacturing process. Then we've got all of our salaries for our office staff, bonuses, tools, stationery, leases on computers, printers, etc., protective clothing, advertising, maintenance, workman's compensation, entertainment and public relations. You can then add as many as you want, and you can insert additional columns here if need be. So this is a summary of all of the other expenses that I have to keep my factory running. And the program will simply, or the spreadsheet will simply total it at the bottom there. So we should be quite happy. That should be relatively easy to set up. Then we go to our third tab, which is our installation labor. Now our installation labor works exactly the same as our factory labor, but there's one small difference, and that is that we work in teams. The installers generally work in teams. So here you have to say how many workers you've got. In my situation, I've got 4 guys who do installations, and they form 2 teams. There are 2 workers per team. Now you might have 3 workers per team. You can set that up however you want. And why we work with teams is because we're in the costing, when we specified our installation labor on each of those doors and windows, the amount of time that we allocated was the amount of time for that team to install that window or door. So if you remember on door number 3 it was, which was our Vistafold door, I allowed 4 hours installation. That means that the team is going to take 4 hours to install. So what we do is I've got 4 workers, they work in 2 workers per team. That gives me 2 teams. They also work a 40-hour week. And then I put the names of those 4 workers down there. I put what is their hourly rate that they get paid. That will work out their weekly rate. And then similarly to the factory labor, I have my bonus, my medical, pension provident, UIF, and any other costs. Now guys, just be careful. Look at the headings on each of these columns. This is a rate per hour. This is a weekly amount. This is an annual amount. This is a weekly amount. So you must have a look at that heading, so whether that is an hourly, a weekly, or an annual figure that you are filling into that block. So once again, this will say on the wages that I'm paying my installers, I'm spending 5,140 Rand a week, but in fact, it's costing me 6,747 Rand a week because of the extra costs. So it's exactly the same as my factory labor. The only difference is here that we're working with teams. Then we look at what our installation overheads are. Now, installation overheads, I have got, first of all, I must separate any vehicles that are used for installation out onto the installation overheads page. So I've got my installments on those vehicles, my license fees, service fees, petrol and oil, cell phones, if I give the installer guys cell phones to have access back to the office, protective clothing, tools, consumables, and then any other costs that I have for my installers. So in a similar way to what we did our factory overheads, we do a list of all of our expenses that are associated with our installation teams. And just like these are all monthly costs that you're putting in there. Alright, so let's summarize. I've set my factory labor, my 8 workers working a 40-hour week. I put their names down, I put their figures in. I go to my overheads, I enter any expenses I have to keep my factory running. I then go to my installation and I say I've got 4 workers, there are 2 guys per team, so that will give me 2 teams, and I fill in their wage information onto this page. Then I go to my installation overheads and I fill in any expenses I have associated with my installation teams. Then we can go to this final page, which is our fabricator cost breakdown. Zoom in a bit. And on our fabricator cost breakdown, there are only 2 figures that I can change. Only 2 figures are shown in red. And that is my average productivity for my factory workers and my average productivity for my installation workers. Now, why do we specify a productivity of 75%? Well, 75% means that in an 8-hour day, I'm getting about 6 hours of actual work from the guys. Which, considering the guys must have tea breaks, lunch breaks and things like that, that is realistic. You can set that figure whatever you want, but it's important that you be realistic with that figure. So our default is that our factory worker has got an average of a 75% productivity. Our installers, on the other hand, go right down to a productivity of 50%. Because those installers are going to arrive at the workshop in the morning, they're going to load up the buckies, they're going to drive to site, they're going to have their breakfast, they're then going to do some installation, then have their lunch, maybe do a bit more installation, and then pack up and drive back to the workshop. So if you can get 4 hours out of an 8-hour day, in terms of physical installation on site, you're doing well. But once again, you must manipulate those figures to the values that you feel represent your business. Once you've now filled in those 2 percentages, then these 4 figures in blue are now accurate for your company. And you can now feed that information back into your staff run program. So my factory labor is 47.96. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into staff run, let's just minimize that a bit. And I'm going to 47.96. My factory labor I set here at 47.96. My factory overheads, according to my spreadsheet, are 237%. So I go into here and I put 237%. Okay, my installation time, remember when I recalculate it, it'll put it in for me. My installation labor is 84.35. So I go in here and I put in 84.35, and my installation overheads are 117%, so I go and put in here 117%. Now that I've done that, I can recalculate. I'm going to use the estimate. And there it is now adjusted my costing, and you will see I now have a factory cost, I have an installation cost, I have my total costs. You'll see my GP is now sitting at 25%. That is the value that we put in. Remember, we changed it from 100%. I also have an installation time of 16 hours assigned now. So my material prices have not changed. I haven't changed anything to affect my material prices. But I have taken my 38.4 man hours at a factory labor of 47.96 and an overheads of 237%. That means that my factory costs are 6,205 Rand and 72 cents. My installation time, the total, if you add up the allocation I gave for each window, is 16 hours at 84 Rand 35. That gives me my factory labor. My factory overheads are 117%, so there's my overheads, and that will give me a total installation cost of 2,928 Rand. Then those are my total costs. I'll take my 25%. Remember, guys, it's critical that you take away that 100% contribution. Remember, on our costing details, we set our contribution now to 25%. You can't work on 100% contribution if you are taking your factory and your installation costs into consideration. All right, so my total of my project is 30,714. I've taken away the customer discount. My net profit is 6,142 Rand. My scaffolding costs, which we put in before, are still there, 1,500 Rand. The contract value ex VAT is 32,211 Rand and 54 cents. Add the VAT, including VAT, is 37,043 Rand and 27 cents. And interesting enough, if you look at our percentage markup on material, we're now sitting at 108.7%. Remember, I said to you, that is the figure that you watch to see whether by mistake you've left something out. And if I had, for example, left out my installation time, let's set that back to 0 and push refresh, then you're going to see my markup on material has dropped quite a bit. I am not marking up my material enough, which means I've left out some costs. If I put those 16 hours back into here, then it'll go back to the 108.7%. So you will always use this as an indication, as just a quick check to make sure that everything has been taken into consideration. And you will learn for your business where that figure will be situated. All right, so guys, that now explains to you how to determine your factory and your installation costs. It is much better to go through that exercise and to determine the correct costs. Because now, whether I cost a single window or an entire golfing estate, my figures are correct for my business, and my factory and my installation costs will work out accurately every time. So once again, thank you very much for taking time to watch this video. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay happy. And we'll see each other again in the next video. Bye-bye.